Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting. And it's great to have such a large group on a cold and stormy night. So thanks so much for coming. And we have an excellent agenda and just a couple of formalities to do before we get into it. First of all, to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Kumameri people of the Yungabe language group, and to extend our thanks to those who organised this, and we'll touch on that a little later. The facilities are behind, so you can come very discreetly. You won't be noticed. And hopefully some of us will join for dinner after the evening. So, the missing steps in strata electrification. It's important to say that while there are many issues swirling around at the moment in this broad area, tonight is a very practical focus. So everything is connected. So things like balcony solar, EV charging, heat pumps and so on. We know it's all connected and interesting, but we really want to focus on the practical aspects of electrification and particularly how to take those missing steps. Our procedure is very simple. We're going to have three presentations. Our three experts are going to present first, and then we're going to have hopefully a very engaging Q&A session. Some of you have submitted questions beforehand, thank you for that, and others are submitting them as we speak. And we'll have our three panelists up on the stage. My name is Lawrence Bull. I'm just a facilitator and no expert in this, but I am an owner in Strata, owner-occupier in Strata. Now, our three presenters, we're going to start off, as I say, this is very practical. We're going to start with Dave Sothern, and he has 20 years of experience in this industry, in electrical contracting, in solar energy and large-scale infrastructure projects, and he's going to bring that very practical expertise to bear. Our second speaker is Kirsty O'Donnell. And if you're wondering why we're having a lawyer here, you will discover how important it is to have the legal input. Of course, as a former lawyer myself, we always need more lawyers. So Kirsty will be approved, I see. So Kirsty will be talking on some of the important issues of regulatory compliance as one proceeds down this path. And then we have Chris Irons, again with immense experience in the industry, and he will speak from the perspective of his organisation, Strata Solar, and bring, in a sense, the kind of strata expertise that will help to protect your owner's investment. Obviously, many investors will not be here today, but solve strata issues. There is a lot of practical problem solving in this area, and we hope that will come to the evening. And duties insistent, there have to be some outcomes. These are our outcomes. This will be 20% of your final assessment. We want attendees to leave with a greater understanding than you came in relation to successfully organising the process of electrification in your strata context. And then do some peer learning. So a lot of this evening is going to be an engaging discussion with our three experts and your good selves. This begins with Dave Sothern. Over to you, Dave.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave. I'm going to take you through a couple of example projects of two different sizes. Start with sort of like a cumulative cost of what it will cost to essentially do nothing for that building, and then walk through the process of getting something connected. I've got some handouts. I didn't make a PowerPoint. I've gone old school. So if anybody actually does want to follow along with some of the handouts, they're on that table back there. Can I start with how many people here live in a strata complex? That makes sense. How many of you guys have got solar, battery or EV charging in your complex? How many of those are just EV charging? How many have got a battery? 2. All right, cool. So the first size I'm going to take you through is a small complex of about 4 to 6, let's call them townhouses on this occasion. So a small complex. If the quarterly bill cumulative bill is around $5,000 a quarter, that's going to have the total strata complex using about 183 kilowatt hours per day. Now, to solve that problem, you're going to need about a 40 to 50 kilowatt solar system, and depending on the interval data analysis, possibly around 120 kilowatt hour battery system. So if it's costing you about $5,000 a quarter now, and we work it on a square 10% increase, over the next 10 years, you're going to spend $320,000 between those 4 to 6 townhouses, which is quite a lot of money. If you look at the daily cost across those 4 to 6 townhouses, it's about $54 a day now. That's about $130 a day in 10 years. So if you want to do a system about that size, the process is fairly simple, except for the strata committee itself, which is probably, for most people in the room would understand, that's probably the most difficult part of the process, is getting through the actual committee and then taking it to an AGM and actually getting it approved. So ideally what you do is get a contractor or an advisor to do a feasibility assessment for the project, which on a system that size could just be a quote, but with some good data. So you'd want to get some interval data for the building. And now actually I'll take it back a step. How many of you know whether your building is in an embedded network?
What's an embedded network?
There we go. All right, so there's two types of ways that a strata community can pay for their power. Let's imagine a row of townhouses, one big switchboard, and there's a meter and a main switch for every townhouse. They're all paying for their own power. They could do this on their own, and they could just put a small solar system on top of that townhouse with a small battery. It connects to their meter. That's it, job done. An embedded network is more of a newer style of development where there's one parent meter and that meter distributes out to the rest of them. Now, a lot of these from the construction of the building are locked into whoever paid for that embedded network, which could be good or bad depending on the embedded network that your builder decided to hand it over to. And that means you would have to connect the solar system to the parent meter so that it would distribute power across all of the complexes. And that's where you're going to have to actually, as a committee, decide what to do. I'll give you an example of an apartment building in Bulimba that we did, where the body corporate decided to put on a solar system just to cover the elevators, the pools, the sauna, etc. There's a whole lot of townhouses that were within the same embedded network, so like the premium of that complex, right? You had some individual townhouses. The apartment already did the job. Townhouse owner comes in and tries to see if he can put solar on his own townhouse. Couldn't actually do it without $20,000 worth of engineering because the apartment building had already taken the rest. So that is one challenge with an embedded network if you've got like an apartment complex with some actual, individual townhouses. So yeah, again, so does anybody know if they're not in an embedded network? They've got separate meters. All right, so you've got the choice to then come together as a community and you could install an embedded network to share the cost if that's how you wanted to do it, or you could just do it yourself, run your own race. The process for a system that small is literally just, get the feasibility assessment done, get some quotes together, decide as a small committee of 4 to 6 townhouses that you want to do it, and pull the trigger and get the project done. From the signature to the completion and energization of the system would only take about 2 months. So that's on a small system, what we call under 30 kVA. And that's anything larger than that. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is these guys have got a quarterly bill of $17,500 collectively. That's a larger complex of around 18 to 20 apartments. They're going to be using about 641 kilowatt hours per day of energy. And their cumulative cost, their annual cost, is $70,000 a year. With the 10% increase, they're going to spend $1.15 million for the next 10 years. So their daily cost for the complex is $192 a day, which will go up to about $453. So they need about 150 kilowatt solar system, and most likely about 1/4 of a meg or larger battery to sort of achieve a 70 to 80% self-sufficiency. So if they want to go through that process, it's way more long-winded. So this is where you're going to need to get really good interval analysis done. You would definitely want to deploy an embedded network if the site didn't already have one, to simplify the process, because otherwise the first couple of units or blocks would get the easy way through the Energex application process, and then everybody else after that would have to do their own engineering, which is just not feasible. So we would recommend to people that were in a complex like that they do install an embedded network first, so that we can then connect a total massive system to that embedded network and share it across. Once you've got your feasibility assessment done, a system like that's probably going to cost about, I don't know, $500,000, 550 grand, but you're talking across 20 apartments, right? So that's going to be a very large scale, 80-90% coverage system. Once you've got your estimates, you definitely want to take that to an AGM, because it's such a huge thing that you guys are going to be doing. And then we need to work with Energex, and that's when the fun begins. So we have to do what's called an SSER, so a site-specific inquiry response, which is basically pay $1,500 to ask them a question. They'll take 2 weeks to recognise that we've asked them a question. Then they'll take up to 65 days to answer that question. Then once they've answered that question, that says we can do what we wanted to do, but we also need to do this, or no, you can't do what you wanted to do, you'll have to scale it back a bit, or just hopefully just yes, we can go ahead and we can do that project. Then we get to the next part of that process, which is called a design compliance report, or a DCR. And then once we've submitted that with a registered Queensland engineer, we then wait another 65 days to get a response, up to. But I've never seen it much better than like 55 days, to be honest. At that point, that allows us to install the system. Then once we can install the system, we then have to do another compliance report, possibly injection testing on the local transformer. It can take another 4 weeks, depending on availability of contractors and engineers, etc. Then submit a final report to Energex, which then they will approve in another 2 weeks. So if we had a signature from a committee saying that we wanted to do a system like this, it's likely that it would take another 7 months to do it. So yeah, that's the hurdles. But that's really the main thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, which was the process. So the process is long-winded for a large system, for a large complex. So you need to make sure that you find the right people to work with, and make sure that they've actually got experience in working on these types of projects, because they need to stay in business for a year at least to deliver the project. So make sure you back the right horse. Yep.
Sorry.
You're right.
In regards to that process,
Yeah.
would the committee manage that process, or would the contractor manage that?
We would manage the whole process as a contractor. Right. We're sort of classified as we're not that scale, but like an EPC, which means we would manage the engineering, manage buying the equipment, manage installing the equipment, and then hand over a bunch of documents at the end, show the committee how to use it, give access to the online portal and apps and all that sort of stuff that everybody needs to see. Yeah, it should be hand-holding throughout. And I would be aware of companies that will just sell you the system but then subcontract out the work, because then you're in between two parties. And if they're not aligned correctly, which is not to say that there aren't a lot of relationships like that that are aligned well, but yeah, it can be risky. And definitely, yeah, just get some references, because otherwise you might give them a $500,000 deposit and their business might not even survive until the energisation. So.
Thanks very much, Dave. I know there are going to be many questions from the contracting perspective. Dave will be on the panel after we have the other two presentations.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Now for the reality,
Simple.
over to Kirsty O'Donnell.
Thank you. That's all right. Just wait for Judy to get up the PowerPoint that I so eagerly prepared for her. I'll try not to be the dampener and make it seem all too difficult. Just as a heads up, this is obviously just general advice only. Schemes are all different, so you do need to get your own independent advice, but I'll try and keep it as practical and as informative as possible without delving into that legal advice side. All right, so I've outlined up on the slide a bunch of initial considerations that committees, owners, either way you're going to present it, need to have a think about. Obviously, you have your statutory obligations which fall under any of your acts, depending on which one you fall under. You will likely have changes to common property. Obviously, if it's a building project, those changes to common property are a lot easier than if you are an individual owner to deal with. If you are an individual owner considering things like this, you may need to look at easements, bylaws, exclusive use areas, upgrades to electrical infrastructure, as Dave mentioned. The big one that I am seeing at the moment is the insurance implications. Insurers are tending to push back, wanting further assurances as to what is going on. I have seen, not in Queensland, but I have seen in New South Wales, policies jump as a result of it. So it is something to just be aware of. You don't want to be in a position where your insurance policy is skyrocketing because you are thinking about a project and it's not something that you've taken into consideration. The upside of obtaining some legal advice early, it really comes down to this. Your committee wants to be as informed as possible. If there is going to be a roadblock in your way, chances are it's not going to be coming from somebody like Dave, it's not going to be coming from an installer. They're there to make the system as smooth as possible. You are going to find resistance from owners who are not open to it, or you are going to find issues in the legislative side where something hasn't been accounted for. And look, that doesn't just apply to solar or EV charging, it applies to pretty much anything where somebody is getting something done. So you need to make sure that when you are considering any installation for anything at all, that you are considering the worst case scenario. That's what lawyers are there for. Essentially to play the devil's advocate and say, you haven't thought about this, you need to think about what's going to happen in that situation. We're obviously also there to try and prevent you ending up in court and arguing with each other about something that you thought was a non-issue. I have seen it recently actually with a water ingress issue, and both sides are $250K in on legal costs, arguing over who's responsible for waterproofing on a balcony. So you don't want to be in that situation where you haven't thought of something, one party thinks something is one person's responsibility, and on the other hand, what's in your bylaws or what's registered in your community management statement says otherwise, because you just end up in litigation and spending money that you don't need to be spending. When you are considering doing an approval, obviously this is based on those that are sitting on committees and considering doing an approval. You really need to look at what your existing bylaws have in there and how they impact the current position of the committee. Just because you already have an existing approval doesn't mean with the changes going on in technology and the upgrades to batteries or changes to batteries, EV charging, your construction codes, your safety requirements in terms of electrical safety, doesn't mean that they're still fit for purpose. So assuming that they are doesn't necessarily mean that they are. If there's a provision for the committee to grant approval, you will probably find that it will actually no longer be valid because of the pricing implications. The legislation has a restriction on how much they can approve when it comes to certain items, and at the moment that's set to 3,000. Most systems are in excess of that. So you're going to find you're batting your head up against a wall with that one. When you are thinking about submitting something to a general meeting, for the committees, how many of you actually sit on a committee? Okay, so about half. Okay, so this is really kind of, it goes both ways. The committee needs to be aware of what is required to make sure that your motions are not deficient, that you're not leaving yourself open to litigation, but also owners, if they submit them, the committee can't change them. So this is where working together and collaboratively with your committees is really important, because they might sit there and go, look, we can't, if you have a project in mind, writing to them and having that discussion with them is probably a really good idea, because they may know things that you don't know. If you're not on committee, get on committee. That is also another really good suggestion. Be involved.
First and foremost, strata is hard work. There it is in a nutshell. There is a very famous in strata world court case in which I think it was a district court judge said that it is impossible to fully comply with strata legislation. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but that's the reality that we face. What we also need to understand that strata involves personalities, and particularly when we talk about electrification, we talk about ideology as well. Even though it shouldn't be present, it is. Remember also in strata that people do not have to vote. Voting is not compulsory in a body corporate, nor do they have to justify how they vote, if indeed they do vote. Thanks, Judy. Some idiosyncrasies for you all to be aware of. The first one, and this is often overlooked, it's group decision making. There's rarely, if any, moment in strata in which an individual gets to take charge and make a decision. It's decisions made as a group. It is highly unpredictable how it's all going to pan out. Thanks, Judy. Kirsty touched upon this in her presentation. People can and do vote against their best interests. It happens all the time. So even though it makes a lot of sense, for example, for a body corporate to vote yes for a particular proposal, and there might be a lot of economic benefits in that proposal, people can and do vote no because they are misinformed, because they are ignorant, or because they don't like somebody on the committee. Spite. Spite is a great motivator in strata. And emotive reactions are really commonplace. And the reason why they're commonplace is because we're talking about people's homes at the end of the day. Anytime that there is any discussion or decision making or regulation about people's homes, it immediately sets people off. In my career now in strata, 10 years or whatever, I've dealt with members of parliament, barristers, judges, doctors, lawyers, other professions, really successful people. The instant they start talking about strata though, it just, all rationality and common sense goes out the window immediately. So that's what you're dealing with. But most of all, strata disputes are not like any other kind of dispute. So if you have a commercial dispute, you go through a process, there's an outcome at the end of it, the parties go away and that's it. You don't have anything to do with each other anymore. In a body corporate dispute, once the dispute is resolved, you will continue to see each other in the car park, in the lift, by the pool, at a meeting. That is fertile ground for more disputes, and it's fertile ground for exacerbating the existing dispute. Thanks, Judy. So a little bit about how to get outcomes then. Given all of that, how do we get outcomes? Clear and consistent messaging. We start there. The second point, and probably the biggest point that I'm going to raise in the context of this discussion, engage with other owners. I'm a strong believer that strata and politics are identical. If you have the numbers, you get what you want. If you don't have the numbers, you don't get what you want. So it's important that you engage with other owners to persuade when you need to. It's really critical to rely upon objective information. Not something that's found from Wikipedia, not something that's found from social media. I can't stress that enough. You'll also need a fair whack of persistence as well, because it takes an awfully long time to wind your way through some of these processes. I think everybody here would know that nothing in strata happens quickly. Thanks, Judy. One of my other hats is that I am part of what's called the Owners Corporation Network of Australia. So I'm its Queensland-based board director. I'm also its joint managing director. We are the sensible, data-driven national voice for strata owners with emphasis on sensible. One of our main roles is advocacy to government. So at the moment, there's this thing called the Community Titles Legislation Working Group, which is convened in the Attorney General's portfolio. And that group is comprised of stakeholders that's giving recommendations to government on changes to Queensland's body corporate legislation. And I represent OCN on that group. OCN is also about good quality information and education on strata issues. And we also partner with like-minded partners to deliver outcomes. Thanks, Judy. Our equation is really simple. The more members that we have, the more that we are able to advocate to government on behalf of those members and on behalf of strata owners. Sometimes it is the case that the squeakiest wheel gets the most attention when it comes to legislative change. That's a reality that we have to deal with. So if you are a strata owner for a very modest annual membership, and by modest I mean under $100, you get the benefit of an organisation advocating for your interests. Thanks, Judy. QR code there to scan if you'd like to get more information about membership. There are some cards on the seats, some up on the table as well, or you can just come and have a yak to me afterwards. My best practice tips then. I always like to finish with best practice tips. First and foremost, be accurate and be properly informed. Go to reliable sources. Can't emphasise that enough. You always have to consider your will, resilience and resources, and that's a particularly relevant point for owners. If you are determined to see this through, whatever the case may be, you need to make sure that all three of those things are well in mind, because there's no point embarking on the process otherwise. You need to remember that you are part of a collective. So as much as you want something for yourself, and that's always going to be your motivation, you have to remember that you are one voice out of many. And you might have to do a bit of work to get people on side with you. You might have to counter with some messaging. And seek qualified assistance. So what do I mean by that? If you've got questions about installation, you'll speak to Dave. If you've got a legal question, someone like Kirsty. If you've got a question about building or engineering, you're speaking to an engineer. If you've got a question about dispute resolution, you might speak to somebody like me. But at the end of the day, there is no point proceeding on any path to try and resolve a strata dispute unless you actually have the information and the accurate information behind you to be able to deal with it. Otherwise, it's a forlorn venture. I can tell you that from experience.
So we'll start with the first one, which on my list is an embedded network exceeded 30 kVA limit. Told we can't have solar unless BC takes on the NMI. BC won't do it. Is there any advice on that circumstance? I think that's probably for you, Andrew.
Who asked the question? Is that you? Yeah. So can you elaborate on that? Are you in an embedded network?
Yeah, the complex is only 5 years old.
Townhouses or apartment?
83 townhouses.
Yep.
And I think technically it exceeded after the first 2 people got solar.
Yep.
And a few people have gone and got solar since then.
Yep.
So technically they're not, I don't know. But yeah, we're told that unless the body corporate take on the parent NMI, that you can't actually submit any more applications for anyone else to, as individuals, get solar within the complex. But then we're told from someone else that, well, even if they take over the parent NMI, you can't then just simply get your solar. Like, there's obviously a lot more involved in that, and then I guess putting up that capacity of the 30 kVA and going on from there.
So who owns the parent meter currently, if the body corporate doesn't own it?
It's still under Origin. I guess I think that's how it works, is that unless we were willing to buy them out for their infrastructure, it's still sitting under Origin.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that, I've had something similar before, so it would normally, like the only thing that's different once it goes over 30 kVA is getting it signed off by an RPEQ and a lengthier process. Like that was the 7-month process I was talking about before. So if you have a bunch of owners that want to do something at the same time, that can be classified as one system and you can distribute the engineering and the RPEQ cost. So let's say it costs like, if we have to put a grid protection board in, you might be looking at somewhere around 30,000, right? But if you had 10 owners, it's $3,000 each, right? So, which is very doable with a bit of a door knock and a clipboard, right? So you could go that way. Or you could research further into, like, just because Origin owns that embedded network, you could still create like another type of collective system, but then you have to convince the people that already are self-sufficient with their own solar to join that system. Now there are some embedded network experts in the room, but I don't know if that's what we want to go to, right?
Well, let's keep going with the questions because people have kind of come for this purpose, but we may broaden it for the exit. Yeah.
Can I leap in? Has a motion gone to a general meeting about it? Has a motion gone to a general meeting about it?
No, not at this stage.
Okay.
I guess we're still trying to, yeah.
Okay.
We haven't, we've sort of suggested that we actually get legal advice around it for a start because we are getting different advice and information. So.
For everyone's benefit, in case, I'm sorry if I'm telling you things you already know, so any owner can submit a motion to a general meeting, that's your right to do, and then any outcome of a general meeting can be disputed afterwards. Yep.
Great. I'm sure there's more to go on this, but let's just run through some of the other questions and then try and coalesce this together. The cost of putting panels on a 4-storey tiled roofs compared to normal houses. On 4-storey tiled roofs, the cost of panels. Double, yeah. Okay.
Double, probably edge protection, scaffold, access, time frame, yeah. Depending on the scale, but close to it. It really depends. The tile roof could have access off of a balcony that could be easily protected. It's really just about worker safety. How hard is it to keep those people safe that are working on that 4-storey roof? That's what it comes down to. So it could be 1.3x of like a single-storey house. It could be 2x. Wouldn't be much more than 2x though. The price of scaffolding, really.
Thanks, Dave. The size of the battery for 12 units plus common property use.
How many kilowatt hours do they use per day?
Can someone help on that?
Probably around the, I'm going to say, 150 kilowatt hours. Well, in total.
Can you ask the primary question again, sorry?
Did you want to elaborate a little on your question?
Yeah, I just want to know what size battery you might be looking at for 12 units in a wide range,
Like a standard old sort of like Gold Coast, upstairs, downstairs, one large building, one large roof, that type of thing.
Plus the common property.
Plus the common property, and you estimated how many kilowatt hours per day?
About 150 total.
About 150. So let's just do quick math, divide that by 4. Let's call it about 40 kilowatt hours a day. Total, I know, just bump it up to 160 and go 40 kilowatt hours per day. There's 4.2 peak sun hours in Queensland. So spread across the year, if you want to be fairly self-sufficient, you're probably going to be looking at like, you could probably do that with like a 15 to 20 kilowatt system with about an 80 kilowatt hour battery.
80 kilowatt hour battery.
Yeah, but you could still keep it. You could keep the engineering cost out of it by just going to a 30 kVA inverter, which should do the job. And you can load up on the battery a little bit more and join a VPP too. Yeah. So yeah.
Great, thanks for that. Once the body corporate committee has decided to install solar or battery, what resolutions are required, particularly if a PPA agreement is required? Kirsty, is that your one?
It is a bit of mine, but it really depends. Without seeing the plans, without seeing the community management statement, the bylaws, God knows. It really depends. Unfortunately, those documents are your principal documents. Without viewing any of those, I'd be barking up a tree that doesn't have an end. Because
I'd probably go as far as to say I don't think a committee would ever be approving that. The value, for starters, would bump it beyond what the committee could approve. And then secondly, committees have what's called restricted issues. So committees are unable to make certain kinds of decisions. One of the decisions they're not able to make are decisions which affect the rights and interests of individual owners. So that would have to go to a general meeting. And going back to your presentation before, at a general meeting, if there's any kind of disposal of common property, and disposal of common property means a whole bunch of things. It can mean leasing, can mean sale. If there's any disposal of common property, it requires a resolution without dissent. So if any one person votes no, it's over, it fails.
And I have seen that happen before, and it ends up right back where Chris used to work, back at the Commissioner's office. Especially if the owners aren't being reasonable. If everyone else is in agreement and they're being unreasonable, then you will end up back there in legal costs, going around in the circle that is disputes.
Yeah.
And it goes for any disposal of common property, whether it's in relation to solar, EV, batteries, anything like that. Depending on what you're looking at doing, for example, exclusive use, you'll need written consent from every owner. You don't necessarily need them on a vote because you can do certain things by special resolutions, but you still need their consent. So you can end up with a varying amount of different resolution types and requirements depending on what's actually registered, what you've passed, if you've amended bylaws, if you've made certain things restricted to your committee, because you can put resolutions in that specifically restrict the committee on certain things that aren't necessarily legislated either.
Great, excellent. Let's take the other two. How do we deal with issues where our friends at Energex cap the number of units in an embedded network who can add in solar battery? It caps the number that can add in solar stroke battery.
Who asked that question? You? Huh? You did? On how many can be installed, it's what can the local transformer handle. So the network is distributed through step-down transformers, and there's only a certain amount of power that they will allow us to connect to. Yeah.
We've got a fairly aged community. They're all worried about price, so it'd be a lot easier to sell them if we could show them that it's not as expensive as I'm sure they're all thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, just reach out to our company. We can put something higher level together for you to take to the committee. Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just make a point on that. Yeah. That yes, there will be some expense, and people need to understand that to actually save some money, you're going to have to spend some money, and there is a payback period.
Yeah.
And it's actually not that bad if you do it right.
Yeah.
And there's a number of different steps to that. But, I think it's important that you've got to be realistic, and I think Chris mentioned giving you the facts and making it very simple and keeping that communicated to all your owners.
I might throw in like a little hot tip for those of you that are trying to sell it to other committee members is the initial cost is usually worked out like on a warranty period of the items that are being installed, right? So that's where there's like, it seems like there's risk there because you might have a 6.5 year return on investment with a warranty on the inverter and battery for 10 years. But the thing is, the electrical infrastructure, the engineering, the structural engineering, the electrical engineering, the RPQ, the Energex applications, none of that has to be paid for again. The panels don't have to be replaced at 10 years. It's simply exchanging the inverter and the battery cells, which is not a big deal. So the cost of replacement, if we look at sort of the scale of the cost of new energy tech and how it's rapidly going down, it should only cost like 30%. So it's really in that, yeah, okay, after 6 years, you're starting to get a return, but in that second decade, that's all money that can be put back into the sinking fund. So.
Yes.
That particular building, I think it was about $42,000 for the solar. Look, it's not covering the whole cost of the body corporate infrastructure because stuff gets used at night as well, right? And they don't have a battery yet. So it probably did about 60% damage on their total bill. It was about 42,000.
Was that complex?
4 stories, quite large apartments, riverfront on the Brisbane River on the south side in Bulimba there. I don't know, I can't remember, honestly. I'd be lying if I said I knew how many apartments, but they were like luxury riverfront apartments. So, you know, like every modern convenience, they all have ducted aircon. Yeah.
House type.
Yeah, like the lift lobbies were air conditioned, the hallways were air conditioned, you know, like, yeah. So it was no holds barred on how much electricity they use. So, but I think we did that like 4 years ago. It's already returned to the investment. That was 3.8 years, I think we worked that one out to be. Yeah.
So 20 apartments, 40, 60?
20, but big ones, like 3-4 bedroom ones,
Yeah.
with a couple of penthouses at the top sort of thing, yeah. Yeah, it was challenging until like recently. We've got some pretty high output inverters now, like just of late. So now we've got some hybrid inverters that can push out 125 kVA. So you may not be able to power every lift, but you could certainly select a lift or two to power with a battery system. Would be no issue. Hey, except price. Yeah, but then if it's a big enough strata building, you're going to be putting in an inverter that size anyway to cater for the solar. So the inverter cost is like, so I'll give you an idea. 50 kVA inverter, you're talking about like hybrid inverter, you're talking about like 8 grand. For 125 kVA, you're talking like 16 grand. You know what I mean? It's not really a big difference in the scheme of things. It's if the system's designed to cover that load, because it's not just lifts as well, sump pumps. Often what we're doing batteries for are sump pumps. Because if they've got no floodgates, a lot of people in those last few years of storms that had basement car parks filling up to the point of where the electrical failed. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so sump pumps are a big thing. Also dewatering pumps for new buildings now. We've got builders reaching out to us for the same thing, to keep their dewatering pumps going when they're digging a massive hole. So, yeah.
I have seen it in one particular building that I am aware of, where it's a 1980s building. They're looking at putting in EV chargers. They are currently spending $250,000 doing an electrical board upgrade and a switchboard upgrade. They have investigated the fact that they would have needed to do that anyway at some point. So I think that's really the avenue you want to go down. They then basically did all of their minutes to allow them to do that. Obviously, you couldn't do that at committee level because of the spending limit. You would have to go to a general meeting. But essentially what you would be looking at doing is you would be looking at getting your quotes to do the works and then submitting them to the general meeting. In New South Wales, if there is anyone here from New South Wales or who knows anyone in New South Wales, they are slightly different. Their committees aren't restricted in the same way. So this particular committee that I'm aware of, they actually just determined at committee level to proceed with the works, but they have that ability. In Queensland, you don't have that luxury. It does need to go to a general meeting because of the spending limits. You can vary the spending limits depending, but you need a general meeting resolution to vary that spend limit. Ordinary. It'd be an ordinary resolution because if you're changing the limit, that's slightly different. But if you are proposing works, as long as the motion isn't deficient in any way, as long as it includes everything it needs to include, then you would be looking at an ordinary, because you're not taking anything away from anyone. Where you start getting into your more complex type of motions is really where you're taking or amending, making changes to common property or a facility. If you're taking away a sauna, if you're taking away, a gym, things like that, that's where you start getting down the other side of your motion types. But realistically, for works, as long as you've got your quotes, then generally, as long as your motion is formatted properly, you will generally only need an ordinary resolution unless there is something in your CMS or in your bylaws that requires something further. But generally speaking.
In Queensland, everybody corporate has a legislative responsibility to act reasonably, which means that they can make refusals on a reasonable basis as well. I'm aware of 2 cases in Queensland where owners sought to have approval to have EV charging infrastructure installed in their underground car park. Both times they were refused at a general meeting. They subsequently went ahead and challenged those decisions in the Commissioner's office, and the adjudicator found that the committee was reasonable in refusing on the basis on which they refused. So as it currently stands, 2 cases where owners have tried to install EV charging infrastructure, the refusal's been upheld. So that's the current state of play in Queensland.
Just to touch on that as well, I am aware in New South Wales, if it is basement infrastructure, the fireys actually treat it as an evacuation. They will not go in. They will evacuate the building. So that may be something that committees need to consider if they've got basement parking, is what are your fire restrictions and things like that? Like, how are they going to treat that if something does happen? I don't dabble in fire safety, so I can't comment on that, but it is a consideration that you need to think about, just like your insurances.
The safety issues were the issues that were most significant in those 2 cases in Queensland. Yep.
So the building in, that I was talking about, it is based in New South Wales, but their infrastructure, from what they have investigated, it was their electrical board. They were looking at putting in 2. They were looking at putting it outside in, they've got outdoor parking. It's not deemed visitor parking. It is used as visitor parking, but it's not on their DA as visitor parking. So they're looking at changing some of those parks to have that EV charging capability. So for them, it is then going to be the cost of whatever the EV chargers are going to cost them. They haven't costed that as yet. They're doing it in stages. Admittedly, they are a lucky building. They have a really good capital works fund, which is the sinking fund in Queensland. They're not having to do any of it out of pocket. So they've built this up over the years, and they've future-proofed the building really well. But outside of that, it's probably a Dave question if there's any other infrastructure requirements. Obviously, you know, if you've got a body corporate manager and they're running an EGM, they'll have their costs associated with it. If you're having a lawyer draft you a change to bylaws or anything like that, again, you'll have those costs. But generally speaking, infrastructure is probably a Dave question.
There's a way slightly around it. You can obviously just apply to install a 15 amp power point, and maybe just not a fast charger and not a DC charger in your bay, which is often like a little way around it, and you don't even have to bring up the EV thing when you park there and you plug it into the power point that you own that's connected to your meter. Yeah, so that's just a way around it while you try and work on your committee.
So when we talk about this issue in the context of strata, there's the complicating factors that involve local and state legislation. So body corporate legislation is state legislation, and then development approvals, that's local government. I am aware that the state government is moving towards establishing some standards for tenants in strata schemes. I think I'm meeting with government next week or something about it on that issue. When it comes to this specific issue in a strata context, there's no specific provisions about these issues in strata legislation in Queensland. So there are specific issues about installation of solar in Queensland as it relates to installation of solar in a strata scheme, but nothing about EV charging. In other jurisdictions around the world, there is this concept of right to charge. There is no legislative right to charge in Queensland. I don't believe there's any other state or territory that does it either. Owners Corporation Network of Australia's policy is that there should be a right to charge. And I think where this issue ultimately ends up is that there will probably need to be a carve-out under Queensland's body corporate legislation. By carve-out, I mean specific exclusion for electrification issues, because as has been evidenced, I think, if you leave it to a group of people to vote upon, they will not necessarily vote rationally, they will vote emotively, and these things will continue to get voted down as a consequence, because people are fighting against ideology and cost. They're the two main issues.
The National Construction Code in October 2025, last year, changed for all switchboards have to allow for future solar, EV and battery. They also have to use 100% of usable roof space for solar, which means excluding walkways, excluding HVAC, but that only new buildings and only commercial. So I was just Googling it to make sure I was not, saying the wrong thing, but basically that happened last year.
You've got a hand up over there.
Yeah, and then originally, apparently, they said it was meant to also apply to residential buildings, but they tabled it. So building ministers paused these residential changes, shifting the focus almost exclusively to new commercial builds. So whether that means next round, depending on how the commercial goes, they bring in the residential as well, I do not know.
No, I was just going to say, I think the big thing is if you do have those outdoor visitor parking and you look at it from a building project perspective, that is definitely, if you're not stuck in a situation where you have to have those visitor parks as part of your DA, it is definitely a very viable solution. You might not be able to give individual approval, but it does give you some options rather than going, doing a straight out no. It may be that if an owner does put a motion to a general meeting, it gets voted down, but it doesn't mean that the committee can't provide an alternative.
If it was my building and my choice of what I think is best, which is what you're asking, I would want to convert it to an embedded network. In the process of converting to an embedded network, you would potentially be able to recoup some infrastructure upgrade costs because the embedded network manager will be able to make money off of that site. So they'll be willing to sometimes contribute something towards a larger project. Instead of paying for lots of different inverters with lots of points of failure, you would want to have one big inverter, utilise the whole roof, one big battery stack. So if someone's on holiday and they're not home, do you know what I mean? Like it's always going to be better to have one collective community item to share, because then you've got the counterbalance of different shifts, different working environments, retired people, working people. It's going to work well. So that, in an ideal world, convert to embedded network. I would also want to put a load management system in and put an EV charger in every bay, because it's cool having 3 for now until everybody has an EV. Then that's not so cool anymore, right? So there's lots of smart tech that we can do, like to manage that load on the building. So we might only have a certain amount there, but I'd rather have every EV plugged in going at like 3 or 4 amps than having 3 massive EV chargers that sometimes are out of order and out of maintenance and whatever. I think it's a short-term solution having those couple of bays, because the cars they sell and important to the country will predict also what people buy. There are plenty of people that go, I'll never have an EV, but then if you can't buy petrol vehicles anymore, diesel vehicles anymore, then they're going to be EVs, aren't they? So for now. All reverse engineered. It's a question we get all the time, but essentially we need to do the research, get the numbers, get the interval data. So does everyone know what interval data is? Yeah, so we get the interval data from that site. If we have to get it from everybody, that kind of would suck, but we've done it before. And then work out the way the building uses power and then design it to suit that building. If it was a retirement village where everybody's cooked their dinner by 5 p.m. and lights are out at 8 o'clock.
That's my house, leave me alone.
Well, no offense. It's a very different scenario to like a modern building in the CBD that's full of young professionals that don't get home from work till 8 o'clock at night. Yeah, for sure. I've done it. I've done an estimate for the Mantra in Surfers, Circle on Cabell. We started working on it.
Very similar.
Yes, very similar building. Yeah, there's Schneider, the electrical company, not Schindler, the lifts, but Schneider. They do I can't remember the name. It's like EVX infrastructure or something. And what that is ideally the body corporate would pay for a trunking and a switchboard to be installed. And then individual owners would pay for what we would call a drop into their car park. So we would install a ring around the car park at the sinking fund's expense.
Yep.
the switchboards and the load management system at the sinking fund's expense. And then you would come up with an arrangement where, as the individual owners get an EV, you either try to recoup some of that cost with a fixed cost for the cost of the drop that then contributes back to the infrastructure that was paid for. There's a few ways to do it, but that is the way to do it. I think their risk portfolio will change a lot with the National Construction Code changing on commercial, because once every commercial building has that type of technology, what are they just going to not insure any commercial buildings anymore? Yeah.
The landscape with insurers has changed. I've seen it change, you know, with the announcements that they make. They're just probably not going as fast as what is needed, which is a bit like everything. You know, legislation needs updating, you know, and it never goes fast enough.
Drags behind.
It always drags behind, yep. And insurances are very much the same. You know, they're going to assess and play devil's advocate with every scenario and work out what their risk appetite is.